Hello, I'm Mark Fisher and I'm here at the South Bank Centre in London to talk to Simon Caine. Simon Caine!
Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Ask the Industry podcast. As you just heard, today's guest is with Mark Fisher. For those of you new to the show, this is the podcast where I interview the most influential people from the world of stand-up, comedy, writing, review, TV, radio, and today, books. This is the first in an ongoing series that I'm going to have on the podcast. It's kind of a sub-series to it all, called the Comedian's Book Club, and essentially it's where I'm going to invite on people who have written industry-level books or books on comedy, writing, anything to do with the industry really, to talk about what they do, how they do it, the book itself, what didn't make it in, what did make it in, how they got it made, all that kind of stuff. And I'm really excited. I really enjoyed chatting to Mark, and he's also been a former editor of The List and has obviously reviewed theatre. He's a real Edinburgh veteran, and as a result I learnt loads from him, and I'm sure everyone will as well. This would be ideal for anyone who is looking at going to Edinburgh in a year's time, which at the moment is 2016, but don't let that put you off now if you are still going up. There's loads in there for everyone. However, if you're planning a show in a year's time, good idea to get in early and learn from the professionals now rather than later. And we talk about sort of timescales on where you can get everything done for the Fringe. So I'm really excited about this new sub-series. If you would like a copy of the book, it is called the Edinburgh Fringe Survival Guide. There is a link on the website and there is a link in the show note, which is an affiliate link for Amazon, which means anyone who clicks that link and buys it through that link gives me 10p, and it doesn't cost you any more to do that. I know it's not a lot, so don't think, oh well, it's not a lot, I won't do it. If you are going to buy it, because if 100 of you do it, it means they get £10 or whatever that number works out as. Numbers are not my strong suit. The point is it helps out the show, so please do use the affiliate link. That'd be amazing. Very quickly, thank you very much for sharing. We're very close to 30,000 downloads, so if you could continue to do that, that'd be great. If you have a friend that you think would benefit from this episode, please do link them to it. If you've done that and you're like, well, I've sent it to everyone I know who might be remotely interested in this podcast, share it on your Facebook. The amount of people who are not performers who are listening who email me at the moment is quite nice. I get like sort of 2 or 3 emails a week, which is awesome, because I don't want this to become an exclusive comedian thing if it doesn't have to be. There are people who are genuinely interested in the industry who are just comedy fanatics or interested in getting into the industry. So share it and tag me in it, so I know, so I can thank you. That'd be amazing. If you've done that and you don't want to do that, whatever, please do think about giving it a review in iTunes. So we're 28 reviews in now. I'd love to get it over 30, just for my own peace of mind. I don't know why. I kind of want to keep the number of reviews above the number of episodes we've had. I know that sounds weird. It's just something I'd really like to happen. I mean, we've still got a few more to go, but it would be great if there was less of a close call, as it were. If you are enjoying this podcast and you'd like to support it in any way, shape or form, you can do so through PayPal on the website. If you just put a monetary value on what you think the episodes have been that you've listened to and you've enjoyed, could be £1, could be £5, whatever. If it's £1, it's 22 episodes, send me £22. That'd be amazing. Every little bit helps. And if you don't want to do that, you can do it a different way, which is support the podcast on an ongoing basis by becoming a patron of the podcast. All you got to do is go to patreon.com/Ask the Industry Podcast, and then you can give as little as $1, which works out about 90p, an episode. I do 3 episodes a month. I get about 80p, but that means it will cost you about £2.70 a month, which is like a cup of coffee. And it gives me a budget for the show. It gives me a budget for episodes, and it means that if I need to travel, I don't have to worry so much about the train ticket costs or taking a day off work or whatever. So it would really help if you wanted to become a patron rather than a PayPal one-off donation. Please do consider it. Honestly, £1 an episode, sorry, $1 an episode even, is not that much, and it does make a massive difference. If enough of you do that, I'll actually have a budget, which means I can take days off work. Well, I'm taking days off work now anyway, but it means I can take days off work and not take so much of a hit on money, which means I can do this more and spend more time on it and all that good stuff. So check out Patreon. You'll be part of a mailing list and you'll get to know when there are live shows first and all that kind of stuff. So there's great perks of being a patron. Finally, last thing before I go on to the podcast itself, my show in Edinburgh has been moved because I was one of the Cowgate Head Act who lost their show due to the Freestival, PBH, whatever issue. I'm not going to get into that right now. Please just Google it if you don't know what that is. Essentially, all you need to know is my Edinburgh show called Buddhism and Cats is now on at Just the Tonic Caves in the spare room there at 7:30 p.m. every night except the 18th and the 24th. Please note that down. Please look it up. Please come, because my program listing in the Edinburgh Fringe printed brochure is now wrong. Please do not read it and don't go to that room. I mean, unless there's a nice show on in that room, go to it if then. But do still come to mine. It is in the wrong venue, time, place, everything in the program. I can't get it changed. I've lost out on that money. I think it costs 300 quid to list. Ignore that. Basically, I'm pissed about it, but I'm sort of just trying to do my best to get the word out that my show has been moved. If you can tell a friend, if you're not going to Edinburgh, just go and see this guy's show. He's really cool. Whatever you want to say. Whatever you want to say. I mean, don't lie. Like, you don't say you've seen it and it was great if you haven't seen it. But do tell them about it, because like I said, I think I've wasted about 350 quid on advertising for it that has now changed simply because PBH did some stuff which lost me my venue. So if you would like to support me in any way, the best way would be recommending the best two ways would be recommending my show to someone who is going to Edinburgh, because like I said, I'm going to have a ball ache of a time trying to convince people to come to it when all the advertising is pointing them in the wrong direction. So it's Just a Tonic Caves, 7:30 p.m. every night except the 18th and 24th. Or the second thing you can do that would really help out the show is become a patron for $1 or more per episode. I'm only going to do 3 episodes a month, so it's not going to cost you that much, but it does really help me out, and it will genuinely really help out the show. So please do consider doing either of those things. Without any further delays, if you want to follow along with the podcast, all the questions I asked can be found at simoncaine.co.uk/Ask the Industry Podcast. Without any further delays, this is Mark Fisher. I'm going to turn that down because it literally flashed. We were talking about... oh crap, I've lost where we were.
We were in a sort of social media vibe and getting hits on websites and that sort of thing.
Yeah, because you were saying you've started a blog for your next book.
Yeah, so my next book is called How to Write About Theatre, which is about how to write about theatre. It's a book about theatre criticism, and as a way of generating some interest before it comes out, but hopefully not pushing it too much, because it comes out at the end of July from Matthew in Drama, and so I've set up a Twitter account and B a blog, so that Google will start picking it up, and some people will start associating me as the person who knows about theatre criticism. And we were just saying about the unpredictability of how many people will alight upon one article or not an article, and then trying to figure out, well, why have 500 people looked at this but only 40 people looked at that, and is it the headline, is it the subject, is it is it the day of the week that you've promoted it, have you not linked in enough different people? There are so many factors that could affect that.
Oh, totally. And are you like being strategic about, like, so if you've got like a 6-month plan for blogs, so you kind of go, this week I'm doing this because it's relevant at this point, and in a month's time I'll do something like so basically doing it maybe by chapter, so every month you do a different chapter to kind of talk about it, or are you just doing it as and when something relevant comes up?
I've gone for the as and when route, which is probably not the best. There is no strategy, so it's obviously not the best strategy, and partly actually I was kind of thinking, well, as long as there's some stuff there on a website that people can look at, they'll get a flavour of who I am and the things I'm interested in and the way I might write, and also the way I've been doing it is that, for to give an example, I'll just spot something that there's some typically a controversy somewhere. So, for example, there was an article in the Toronto Globe and Mail, a review in the Toronto Globe and Mail about an Israeli show, which the theatre critic had taken issue with the show on the basis of its failure, from her point of view, to address the whole Palestinian-Israel situation in any great detail. Yeah. And then there was a backlash about that, people saying that this writer was biased from a pro-Palestinian point of view, and so I sort of summed up what various people had been saying, and then tried to make an argument about the inevitability of anybody's bias when you are a critic.
Yeah.
So, and that I think that article did attract a fair amount of attention. But then you might do something that I don't know what a book review or something else on a maybe less contentious topic, and there's less debate around it. Fewer people may be quoted within the article, so fewer people will have a reason to retweet it, and therefore that might be the explanation for getting fewer hits.
Yeah, the thing is that we had Liz Mealy on a few weeks ago, and she basically made snippets of her jokes and put them online and made them go viral through just a number of means to seed them out to places. But the thing is, she had something to sell at that point, so she had like a link to her first CD essentially, and so sort of did it strategically to coincide with that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you're doing it as like a build-up, because like that, I assume, are you doing any sort of capture of data for those people that might be interested in you, maybe like an email mailing list, or like getting them to follow the blog, or how are you?
I haven't, and maybe that would be a good idea to do. At the moment it's purely down to Twitter and building up a following there through my existing Twitter account, which is Mark F. Fisher, and now I've got Write About Theat. You can't get enough quite
I
letters
hate that, It's always one letter.
Yeah, I was like, the book is called How to Write About Theatre, so shall I call it How to Write About, or shall I write about which are the ideal combination of letters? So Write About Theat is what I've got for, and that's got, I can't remember, 500, 600 followers or something, and I kind of think those are the people that I might imagine would be interested enough to buy it, or at least retweet about it and have their own people who follow them who may then be able to buy it. So it's, I'm trying to keep it as organic as possible, not pushing it too much, particularly because the book isn't even out at the moment. So I don't want to get people interested in something that they can't actually buy. And just out of I suppose I'd finished writing the book, so I thought, I better start promoting or thinking about the next stage, and that was before Christmas. And of course, there's still then another 6 month delay before it actually comes out. So So
publishing stuff.
In some ways, I've been jumping the gun, but then quite surprised that as many people did start following it as they have. So, I should take more tips from you. You can tell me what I should be doing rather than me telling you what I am doing.
Well, no, I'm only asking because I've got a book coming out. And it feels like a really weird advert, doesn't it? Now it's like, you've got books coming out. No, I've got a book coming out at some point this year. I say that because I've sort of half written it, and then my editor came back and went, make it better. Like that was that was the shorthand of all of his notes, and he's very right. I should have done. But so what I've started doing is I've started an email mailing list. So when people find my so for example, the way we got in contact was I wrote an indie guide to the Fringe, and you found that. I don't even know how you found that article, by the way. I'd be really interested.
I've probably got a Google search or something.
Did you really?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, because I didn't know SEO on that, so that's quite impressive as well. So I did a guide to the Fringe. Basically, because I was trying to help people out, like with this, where I wrote a month-by-month breakdown of what I'm going to do at the Fringe, recommending if other people want to follow.
Or did I see it? I might have seen it on Facebook. That's the other possibility. Did somebody link it on?
Maybe
to it on a Facebook.
I shared it on Facebook, and a lot of people shared it. So.
I think I saw you. I tell you what, I remember now.
Go on.
This is very incompetent, isn't it? We've spent hours discussing this conversation. It was possibly. Would it have been within the web, the Facebook group called USA to Edinburgh? Is that a possibility?
Maybe, yes. I'm a member of that because I've got friends in America who come over.
And so either you or somebody else had commented on that. So then I followed the link, and that's how I ended up there. Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, why are you a member of that one?
Well, in terms of promoting my Edinburgh Fringe survival guide, in purely cynical terms, then keeping aware of the people who are talking about, I've got all these problems about coming to the Edinburgh Fringe. How do I survive? What do I do? Then again, I think you have to be quite softly, because I don't think people react nicely to being sold something. But if I can genuinely, and I am genuinely supportive of the Fringe, I don't think it's a pretense. If I can say, hey, I'm not particularly good on questions of accommodation, but if somebody says, should I perform in the Assembly Rooms or the Pleasance or whatever, I might be able to come in and say, well, actually, it's really useful to talk to someone like Neil McKinnon or Barry Church-Woods or whatever, who'll be able to talk to you about the different venues and different setups. And so there are certain answers that I can give just because for the same reason you're talking to me now, I suppose, that I can just occasionally come in and join in a discussion. So it's also, as a journalist who writes about the Fringe, it's also useful for me to know who's around and what people are doing, and if sometimes you might pick up on an idea somewhere. You don't always, but
it's really interesting to me because I've made friends with a lot of journalists and a lot of just from my own journalism, and I made friends with a lot of reviewers recently, and they're all in these groups.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that dick around in groups and make themselves look like idiots in them, and then they go, "Oh, they never came to see my show," and you're like, "Well, maybe."
I wonder why.
Because they saw you and thought, what a prick. like, I don't want to hang out with that person. Or I don't want to come and see a show from someone who's being that. And I get, because on Facebook you forget a lot that there's, it feels like your space a lot of the time. But you do forget that when you're in a group, a public group especially, there's people who aren't in your space, who are in your world, as it were, that you shouldn't maybe...
I think in general it's a huge lesson that people need to learn about social media, that you're not in the pub. It feels like you're in the pub having a chat with your mates, but actually, and I think, I don't know if you feel this as well as a journalist, I kind of think pretty much now anything that I write, whether it's an email if I sent you an email, you can still forward that email. You could still, if I badmouth somebody or say, I can still pick up on it. And certainly if it's a tweet or it's a Facebook, it's even a Twitter conversation you think you're having between two people. I find it quite easy to lose track of whether this is a private conversation or a public conversation, or if people who are following both of you can listen into it or not. Whether if it's a direct message, they can't. But I'm never too sure.
Yeah, the only safe way of doing it is offline. In real life,
in a pub.
Go
to the pub.
But apparently we don't want to do that. It's a lot easier to just sit on the phone and go and just send that message out and then be like, oh, no one's going to see it. And you're like, yeah, we definitely will.
And then that's why people, they make death threats or they make comments about blowing up airports or whatever it might be, that all of us might do at any normal conversation. I
don't know what you talk about. I don't. Feels like you revealed way too much.
I'm thinking, of course, this will go on the internet. I'm not going to blow up an airport. I'm not going to.
Just to confirm, you're definitely not going to blow up an airport.
But if you wrote it down, then people without irony or without context might believe that you are going to do that.
Yeah, I went to the Edinburgh Fringe roadshow in London a couple of weeks ago, and I met up with Bruce Dessau while I was there, and we were just chatting away and stuff, and he just went, just by the way, I saw your article about quitting Facebook. Maybe don't have a breakdown on Facebook. I was like, I wasn't having a break. If you read the thing, I wasn't having a breakdown. I was just saying I'm cutting it down because it hurts me and I don't like it. I'm not enjoying it. Like we were talking about before, where it's sort of hard to explain sometimes what a network is to people who aren't on it. And then when you're on it, you're like, don't maybe want to be on this, but I have to for work. Yeah. It's sort of weird, but it's a good networking tool.
Yeah, and it's difficult to know for sure whether it's. I think initially you just have to regard it as a fun way of passing your time in between other things, whatever. Because if you went in with the attitude that I am definitely going to profit from this, then well, you can tell me that because you might get employed by people who do want you to be tweeting for them. But if I think that I'm going to sell 10 million copies of my book, or link to articles that millions of people are going to read, then I don't know if Twitter and Facebook are the best ways to do that. You might get a few of your existing mates, clicking like or whatever, but they might not even be. Even the people who are landing on your website might not actually be reading it. They might stay for a couple of seconds and then go somewhere else. So I think it can do something to change your profile slightly about how people perceive you, but I'm not totally convinced that unless you're in the kind of Amazon type category of being, really big, then quite difficult to get a direct effect with social media. But I think you can get indirect effects.
Unless you're really lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got friends. I've got a couple of friends of mine on Vine recently who now have a ridiculous number of followers, and they can get people to come down and see them, and they can, and it's you sort of sit there and go, well, I'll get that many followers, but it's like it's not this connection between those people as well, and it's built up over time.
Yeah,
and
probably also the nature of the thing that you're promoting makes a big difference. So you I was looking at some of your stand-up YouTube videos.
Thanks for the view.
It went up from 4 to 5, and so I thought, oh yeah, I know what you're like. That looked quite funny. That sort of, you get a sense of you're not just this
quite
name
funny.
of a person. Quite funny.
Obviously
not hilarious. obviously not something you'd actually want to come pay and go and see.
I'm doing free Fringe, by the way. Free Fringe.
But you get a sense of who you are. But the point I'm making is that the comedy, a certain sort of comedy, a punchline-y sort of comedy, probably adapts well to a 140 character format. If you were a long narrative storyteller, then maybe would that format work quite as well? It might be a different sort of thing. I don't know.
It definitely doesn't. I used to do one-liners. Now I do them on Twitter because they work there. Yeah. And I had someone come down. I have someone who's been following me for about 8 months, and they came and saw a preview of mine about 2 weeks ago, and they afterwards came up to me and said, oh, hey, it's me from Twitter, I remember I tweeted you, and I went, oh, that's nice, it's nice. It's hi, it's nice, how are you doing? And then they were like, yeah, this is so different to what you do online. And I was like, yeah, but I do try and put up as many videos of stuff that show that, and I do date all my videos so people know that 2 years ago that's what I was doing, last week this is what I'm doing, so you can kind of get a better idea of it. And I know what you mean, it's very hard to tell a story on Twitter.
Yeah. And as a journalist, the easiest thing for me to do is to say, hey, there's an article in The Guardian I've written, here's an article in The Scotsman I've written, whatever it might be, because that's just a URL and a quick link to it, and it can just draw attention to people's attention. It doesn't directly benefit me, I suppose, but it reminds people that I'm out there. So as a journalist, you can do that. But So the format works quite well in that sense. But when you start having those conversations with people, those sort of intense political conversations, and you try and express sophisticated idea, or not as sophisticated as you can, in 140 characters, and then other people start joining in, and the number of characters that you have at your disposal diminishes. It's not very efficient.
No, and it's annoying as well, because you find, like, by maybe 5 characters to the end, you all of a sudden have a point you realise you want to make as well.
Yeah,
and then you go, oh, I'm going to have to write 1 of 2 or something, and then you've got to fit it in 2 because you've said it was 1 of 2, and it's just so annoying. Yeah. Also, you said to me that you are sometimes mistaken as Mark Fisher online.
That's right. There are a number of Mark Fishers. Only the other day, this wasn't the most recent example. Oh, the very most recent example is only the other day I was followed by a Mark Fisher on Twitter, and I just thought, oh, that's quite funny. He's following me for no other reason than he's obviously done a search for his own name and come up with mine and followed me for that reason. And we've had a couple of perfectly genial exchanges, but I do notice that his place on the political landscape is completely the opposite to me. He's an American Tea Party right-winger, and I'm not one of those things. So I'm just waiting to see which one of us gets really pissed off with the other one for expressing some view that we find abhorrent. But prior to that, the Mark Fisher that who I haven't come across on social media, I think I Googled him and found him on LinkedIn, but he is somebody who is on the same database as the people who are proofreading my next book, and they inadvertently tried to commission me to do some proofreading job, basically, that really should have, did eventually go to him. I was sort of pulled off that job for being the wrong Mark Fisher. But being a sort of eager freelancer who just says yes to everything, I thought, this is a bit odd, but I'll do that. And then they said, and then, of course, I didn't know what I was meant to be doing, and they thought, he shouldn't be asking these sort of basic junior questions that I was asking them. And they twigged that they actually had 2 Mark Fishers, but there was a Mark Fisher who this is of no interest to anybody apart from me. A Mark Fisher who was the Shadow Minister for the Arts, Labour Shadow Minister for the Arts. I'm not MP for Stoke-on-Trent, I think. And I think I once got a cheque that from the Independent that should have gone to him because obviously our names were on the same database on that occasion. And there is a Mark Fisher who's pretty active as a left-wing thinker, and he's written a book called Capitalist Realism. So I'm not the Mark Fisher who wrote Capitalism Realism, though I do sometimes on social media get people asking me clever questions about Marxism or whatever.
I do show notes for every episode, and I'm looking forward to now having to look up every
all
Mark
the Mark
Fisher
Fishers, yeah.
and just like put like links to different, and you'll just have a list of it will say Mark Fisher, and people can just click at random. And
I think you'll probably find quite a lot of real estate agents in America who have that name as well. And I don't know who they are.
Is that a common estate agent name that I'm not aware of?
It seems to be. When I've done, there's a bad thing. This is like taking a selfie, isn't it? When you've Googled your own name.
Yeah.
those are the people who seem to come up. And how about you? How many Simon Caines are out there?
I have a funk band that used to exist called Simon Caine. And
weird.
They have a Wikipedia entry, because I tried to make myself a Wikipedia entry at once, right?
And you couldn't.
And actually, I've tried to make it several times, but they keep deleting it. I tried to make a Wikipedia entry, and when you type in your name, it says, do you want to check to make sure this isn't the reference that you're talking about? And I went to it, and it was a short-lived funk band, and none of the people in it have got the name Simon or Caine in their name.
How weird.
And I googled it to find out if it's like a reference to like a fictitious. None. It's just a name they came up with, and it's like there's a band I really like called Milburn, and none of them are called Milburn. And they called themselves it because someone in the class that they were in when they were at school said, "I bet you won't call your band Milburn." And so they named themselves Milburn, and I really love them. If you don't know them, look them up. They're blooming amazing.
Yeah. And Stornoway have no connection with Stornoway either.
I've
apparently.
no connection. I've literally everyone mistakes me. Everyone says I must be related to Sir Michael Caine because my last name is spelled the same as his.
Right.
And then I always say no, and then they always insist in checking to make sure that I'm not lying to them. And I'm like, no, why would I lie about that? Why would I?
That would be worth going big on,
wouldn't it? That's definitely something I would say, no, I am. Why? I don't lose it. It's not like you're asking if I am him. If I am him, I might go, no, I'm not. I don't want to sign anything right now. But no, it's just mad. But that brings up an interesting question. I've been asking reviewers if they mind being quoted because when you write a review, I'm presuming you don't write it with the intention of certain bits of it being quoted, because you're just writing a review. And do you actually write it with the intention of sort of like this bit might be useful for that show quote-wise, or?
I don't think. I think I've realised rather too late in life that I'm actually quite difficult to quote. I think I have. I think.
Most reviewers are.
I hope well, maybe they are. I don't know. I hope I make myself clear and express myself okay. But I think when I sometimes think, I've written a really good review. Why didn't they quote me on the poster? And then you look at your review and think, well, actually. It's full of clauses and things, and it never quite says this show is the best show you should ever see, and I don't know. It's not maybe a direct thing, but maybe an indirect thing. You sometimes think, well, let's just get to the point here and have a nice chunky phrase that they can quote. But even then, I'm likely to put sort of some caveat in brackets or something right next to it. So I sometimes wonder if I'm quote. I mean, I don't. You're right. I mean, in principle, that you're not writing for the poster, and if I was writing for the poster, I would think in a different sort of way. And it's not. It's an odd thing. There are a number of things as a reviewer that happen because you're a reviewer, but that you're not trying to make happen. So I'm not trying to make end up on a poster, and I'm also not. If I went to one of your gigs and I reviewed you, I wouldn't be reviewing it for you. I wouldn't be writing for you. I'd be reviewing for potential audiences or people who'd seen it or future historians or whatever, but not really for you. Yet the only person I know who will definitely read this review is either you or your mum or your girlfriend, or whatever it might be. Maybe you don't read. Some people don't read their own reviews, which is fine. But it's a weird thing knowing that the one group of people who are most interested in reading your reviews are the ones that you're not actually writing for. So
definitely.
So, and very difficult to put that out of your head, because if I give you a bad review, I know it'll hurt, and I'm thinking, well, it's all these other people who may be at the gig who I'm on their side. I don't want them to waste their money going to see a bad gig. Not that reviewing is all about see it, don't see it, but that's an element of it.
I don't mind a bad review. Don't give me a bad review, but I don't mind a bad review as long as it's constructive as to how you thought it was bad. The worst reviews I ever read are the ones where the reviewer just goes, "Oh, it was rubbish. I didn't enjoy myself." But then why? Why didn't you? What was the thing? And it's usually a student reviewer. If I'm honest with you, it's never. I mean, you're quite a I've read a lot of your stuff, and I know your writing style. It's why I know you, but I didn't know you'd written I didn't make the connection between you and the book. I don't know if that's what you you want,
You
if
thought
that's what you want to hear or
you thought
not.
I was writing capitalist realism, didn't you?
Basically, yeah. This is the
I'm
wrong
sorry
podcast.
to disappoint you.
But it's one of those things. So because you don't immediately connect people necessarily. It's like when I meet someone, sometimes I think, oh, their Twitter handle, because you think of them off of there kind of thing. So I didn't make the connection between your writing in The Guardian, for example, and your book.
Yeah.
I just got the book because someone said to me, this book will benefit you. In fact, I think it was you wrote to me after I'd written the article and said, you might like this book. And I asked some friends, has anyone read this book? And one person said, yes, I have, you'd like it. It's good.
It's the best book I've ever read.
Well, no, because in the last way, I thought you'd be biased in your own book. Yeah. And as much as your book is great, I just don't trust an author necessarily about their own work.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. I put it this way: when I have my book out, I'm going to say it's great, but I hope they won't all take my word for it. I hope,
and I think,
and it's why I'm sending out copies to people ahead of time, because I want them to do some of the marketing as well. Not in a I can't be bothered kind of way, but in a your opinion matters way more than my opinion, because ultimately, in a tiny way, do you ever have this bit where you've written something, you've written a book, and you sort of go, it is a bit shit though, like by comparison to some other books I've read, where you go, it's not as good. I wish it was better.
And you can see those bits where it doesn't quite flow, or
So,
but I think the point that you're making is that I think it's a really important one, which is that word of mouth is way more important than getting one person's review, your own opinion, or even the opinion of a critic. It's like it's your mate saying, "Oh, this band are great. Let's go and see them." It's that's the thing that's going to be persuasive, and you put on a good show. The audience likes it. The audience goes and tells their mates, and that's far more. I mean, it might be reinforced by written reviews or interviews or some marketing material of various sorts. But it's really your friends reassuring you and say, well, I know them, I know their tastes, and they've got no reason to bullshit me.
Yeah.
So of course I'm going to believe them, and if I'm looking for something to do, then that's what I'm going to go down. And I was going to say, before we started off talking about social media, and you're talking about opinions about justifying opinions within a review, and the thing about opinions is that everybody's got one. There isn't a single person. We're sitting in the where are we? The
Royal Festival Hall.
If anybody goes to see a show tonight here, there won't be a single person who comes out with no opinion. They might say they don't understand it. They might love it. They might hate it. It's still an opinion. And anybody on Twitter who's listens to something, goes out to see something, whatever, they'll all have an opinion. So there's nothing at all special about having opinions. The only thing you can say as a critic is that you can take it one step further and say, well, why did you have this opinion? And those are the things that will make people read you or make your stuff, if not necessarily agree with you, but will understand what it is that you're saying, whether you're an artist or an audience member or a researcher or whoever you are, whatever reason you might have to read it.
So as a reviewer, do you think that your reviews, not in a big-headed way, but do you think your reviews start word of mouth, or do you think they complement it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'd like to think, I quite often say that I like to think that my reviews are the start of a conversation, not the end of a conversation, and I'm very comfortable with the internet world that we're now in, which is that people can join in and debates can go on online between people that you might, as you say, that you might never meet in real life. Whereas, in the old sort of classical template of the newspaper reviewer writing from on high, and it would be this sort of tablet of stone, this is the opinion that the Times has about this particular show. Well, that seems a bit final, and that doesn't really interest me. And I think even before the internet, I hope my way of writing would be, hey, we all went to see this show. This is what I thought. What did you thought? And that's the sort of that's not said explicitly, but that's implicitly the way that I would our approach. So to answer your question, whether that goes in parallel with word of mouth or generates word of mouth, I mean, it must be a bit of both. But I would like to think it's connected with word of mouth.
Do you go into the comments of your articles and get involved with the conversation then, or
little bit? It doesn't happen as much. I think it happens. The Guardian do encourage you as a writer to do that if it happens, but the weird thing about writing about theatre, which is what I mainly do, is that it's seen in small places, like to an audience of 200 at a time. So there's actually quite rarely a critical mass of people who are interested in one review to get a discussion going. Some people do read it, but they haven't necessarily seen the show themselves, and so they might pick up on a. Somebody did the other day. I misused a word. I used a word wrongly, and so somebody said, "I think you're fine." So you might get that sort of thing, which is fair enough. But it's quite rare, I find, that you actually get much of a discussion, and I think that's a shame because the internet has that capacity to do that. Often it seems to be that if you mention Kylie Minogue in passing, you get all the Kylie Minogue fans saying, "Well, I really like Kylie Minogue," and it goes off in some other direction that you can't really comment on anyway. But and also I think if I've given my opinion, if I've said these are my 300 words. Either good or bad or whatever it might be, and then someone comes on and says, "Oh, you didn't like it, but I really did." I kind of think, well, I don't want to stick the boot in any more than I have done. What more can I say? I can't say, well, all I can say is, well, glad you liked it, but it doesn't seem reasonable for me to, if they've picked up on a point of detail. So there was an example of a show in Scotland that was
in the Fringe, or just
no, it was in the year, and it was about. A musician who was very popular as a sort of bio drama, and so all the fans of this particular musician were sort of naturally predisposed to liking it, and I liked him well enough as well. But I thought there were some weaknesses of the show, so I said so that in my review. But then you got people coming on saying, "Oh, but I really like him. Why don't you like?" As if I should like the show just because I like the musician, and so then you might have to try and explain yourself in a little bit more detail, saying, "No, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the musician, but I thought there were some weaknesses of the show." But so I like the idea of being involved in a discussion, and I'm perfectly up for the idea that someone can say I'm talking rubbish as well.
I'm interested. Is that contractually with you and The Guardian, or they just say if you want to, it'd be really good if you...
Yeah, if you want to, yeah. In fact, it's quite a difficult thing to contract you to do because
might never comment. Yeah, because I find, for me, I've done some work social media-wise with different publications, and the thing I always encourage them to do is have conversations with their audience, because that's the thing that will make them stand out differently. Because if there's a review for a show on 5 different publications, you might go to it because you feel a bit of loyalty to that thing, but what you're really going there for is for the comments, the discussion that's happening. It's a bit like with YouTube or with podcasts. That's what you're interested in.
And actually, when you see the article just in the headline and you realise that it's got 22 people commenting, you think, "Oh, something interesting is going on there. I'll go and see what that discussion is." And I do think one thing that does happen, you've probably discovered this as well, that if you do go into a discussion, you sometimes get someone. The equivalent in my head is someone who's driving a high performance car, and they sort of become a different creature. They might be very meek and mild in real life, but you get behind the wheel and you become this terrible, aggressive, tailgating driver who's causing havoc on the roads. The internet is very like that as well, because you can hide behind often an anonymous name on the internet, and you can be rude and dismissive and often when you get somebody like that and you come on, "Hi, I'm Mark Fisher, I wrote this article, and thanks for your comment," but you suddenly realise that you find them backtracking and saying, "Oh yeah, I didn't really," and they become you then start having a more subtle conversation, because it isn't that extreme of "you're an idiot, I'm clever," whatever. You realise that you've actually got quite a lot in common, and one person's it might be a misunderstanding, it might be anything, but once that anonymity is dropped, I think you get much more productive conversation.
Yeah, people, especially online, jump straight to the extreme.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's just anonymity. I think it's more you don't think there's a repercussion, so you go not just because of anonymity, because sometimes you do it on Facebook where your name's there and you've got hundreds of friends that can see it and stuff, but you just think, well, let's send that into the world and then I'll go off and I'll whatever. No one will care, no one will read it. Like I always said at the start, but in reality, hundreds of people are reading it, and it's there forever. Yeah. So even if hundreds of people haven't read it, over the course of 10 years, 1 million people might read it and might find it just from a random search, like you said with your blog, where it just comes up, and you don't think about it. It's kind of like, don't put something online and don't be a dick. It's probably that's all we've got so
mantra.
far. And what do you think of the star rating system then?
Star ratings. Shall I speak in favour of them before I speak against them? One of the things that you may observe about star ratings is that even though people like me will often rail against them, when other theatre critics meet each other, we never talk about the show we've just seen, but we'll talk about the show that we've written about the night before or the week before. We'll say things like, "Oh, I gave it a 3, but it was almost a 4." It was like, and we'll use this shorthand of star ratings because we do understand something about it, and the problem with the thing about stars is that they are very, very blunt, and as a writer what you want is to people to read your words. And I was just talking about opinions, and everybody has opinions, and so everybody can probably find their position on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scale, and that's really not very interesting. It's only it might be work as a recommendation to go and see this or not go and see it. But one thing I particularly feel with stars is that there's no way of distinguishing between a show that I would really like to go and see, which is the show that is hugely ambitious but fails, and to distinguish between that and the show which isn't ambitious at all but succeeds in its limited ambition. Now, in both cases, you might give it 3 stars. This one failed in its ambition, but it was really good, a good attempt, so it has to get 3 because it didn't win, didn't succeed. And this other show, which didn't try much, but did it well enough. And that's also a 3. So anybody looking at those 2 things would think, well, there's some sort of comparability between these shows. And it's really like, is an apple the same as a banana? They're both 4-star fruits, but there's no way that an apple is the same thing as a banana. And so that's actually a tangent. I don't know whether the bananas and apples, I understand what you're saying. Bananas and apples might be a distraction. They don't taste the same,
but there is something in. You still get the nutritional value out of both.
Yeah,
something like that.
And so only by reading the. So then, if you're writing and you've got these stars, do you deliberately bump up the ambitious thing that you want people to go and see by giving it more stars than it's actually worth, and that might make you seem less critical, or so there are some interesting things you can do with stars, which is that you can write an enthusiastic 3-star review and a less enthusiastic 4-star review, so you're sort of playing against it. But if you think about it in terms of percentages, if each star rating is equivalent to 20%, so the 5 stars would be anything between 80 and 100. That means that there's pretty broad areas between, and we're going to get my maths right here, the 60. So I'm going to start this very, very carefully. So 1 star is 20%, 2 stars is 40%, so 3 stars is 60%. So the distinction between 59 and 61 is pretty small, but it could be the distinction between 2 stars and 3 stars. And I do find that quite often I wouldn't have to change a single word of what I've written to be happy about moving something down from a 4 to a 3 or up from a 3 to a 4 or whatever, because actually the words say what you feel, and it really depends on which category you put it into. And it wouldn't, I'm fairly certain with a conversation, if I met you afterwards and you said, well, what about this, what about that, and we would come to some negotiation that there probably wasn't that much distinction between. It might seem that you and I have a huge discrepancy because you've given something 2 stars and I've given something 4 stars, but actually you could talk me down to a 3 and I could talk you up to a 3, and we'd be really in the middle ground somewhere.
The more I think about it, the more reviewers I meet, the more I think it's probably harder for you to pick a star rating than write the review. Probably, sometimes.
Yeah. And it can cripple you. You can think, what am I going to give? What star rating am I going to give?
Yeah, because it's also a lot of the time the thing most people look at.
Yeah.
Because they're all lazy. So, and also it's the thing that PR people will just go, well, it's 4 stars. Let's chuck that on the poster. Let's not even read through it and see why it was 4 stars or whatever. So
if I should say that if people are listening to this, we're actually part of a cult.
There's a group of people nearby who are practicing speaking. I think is I don't know what's happening. So I'm hoping that it won't impact the recording too much. We may have to move, but then there's a door the other way. Sorry.
Yeah, we're a cult.
I'm on a budget. Give me a break. Are you ever limited then by the number? I mean, either in your own mind or journalistically, like maybe by the publication, by the number of 5 stars you can give? Because I imagined if you went and saw a run at Edinburgh of 4 shows and you thought, oh, these are amazing, and then you went back and gave them 4 5-star reviews. I'm imagining the publication would be like, you sure?
You I don't know if it. Well, sometimes it's explicitly said, and the Edinburgh Festival is is the sort of time that it would be said because actually, for all I've said against star reviewing, when you have a choice of 100 shows in a day or 100 shows in an evening, then actually there is a lot of people looking for advice, and the distinction between a 5 and a 4 is pretty crucial, and so it does pay for an editor to say, look, we've really got to be tough about this, and the List magazine, for example, will make it clear to the reviewers in advance of seeing stuff that 5 should be very special. You maybe see 1 or 2 5-star shows in the run of the Fringe, and if it's more than that, maybe you're being too generous. And a 4-star should be a pretty good recommendation. So sometimes it's done explicitly, but I think for me it's just implicit, so that and it would be particularly if I'm writing through the year for The Guardian, you're thinking, well, this is a national newspaper that is so if and particularly say a production of a classic play, so this production of King Lear, if I think it's really good, we'll say that, but you're kind of thinking, well, is it the best production of King Lear that's been on in the past decade in anywhere in the UK? And you think, well, it's hard to tell. I haven't seen them all, but chances are that there's could be something better. So you're sort of a little bit conscious of not being too generous, and also stopping yourself and there is a temptation to get wage inflation, star inflation, so that if you've seen a show that was 3 stars and you think, well, this one's better, so I'll give that 4 stars. This one's even better now, I'll give it 5 stars, and suddenly you've got no headroom to go any more than that. So.
Yeah, and I can imagine if you've seen a performer 3 or 4 or a production company 3 or 4 times, you sort of think, well, they didn't have a good night tonight, but I've seen them have good nights. So the sort of not your bias, but your natural human inclination of what you've seen them do before might be like, well, it's a 3 star. I want to say 3 stars, but I've seen them do better, and I do want to see this go well. So it's sort of. That's the other issue with reviewing in general. And
there was somebody that I just came across on Twitter who'd linked to a blog that she'd written, and she was quite clear within this blog to say that she regarded herself. She made the distinction between calling herself a reviewer rather than a critic, which I think she didn't explain what she meant by that, but I think what she meant by that was that she was more of a fan and an enthusiast than somebody who was the sort of authoritative opinion. But she wrote this blog in response to people who had been criticising her for being too generous. And within the thing, she linked to the very first review she'd ever done. I think just a sort of young reviewer. And I sort of went on. I thought, well, I wonder what she's talking about. So I went on, and the very first thing that she'd done, she'd given a 5-star review to. But even within the blog, she was saying that her editor, whatever website she was writing for, had been saying this thing. 5 stars should be pretty rare. And yet, by a huge statistical fluke, the very, very first thing that she'd seen was a 5-star show. And if you've got any sense of perspective, you think, well, to me that seems slightly unlikely that this would have been a 5-star show. So if you just sort of it's difficult, because you 2 days later you think, oh yeah, maybe I was just caught up in the heat of the moment, and it was a perfectly good show, but it doesn't, that tingle down your spine moment, which is what I often look for in a 5-star review, that did I get that, did I not get that, was it really a good 4?
Because the thing is, a lot of friends of mine who are audience members essentially for show, they don't do performance at all, so that's what I look at them at, they're just audience.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, they go, oh, okay, I'm just looking for the 4 or 5-star shows. So do you think it's audiences perpetuating performers feeling like they need to get those stars? Or, because 3 stars to me is still a very good review.
Yeah.
I think anything less than that, you need to reconsider what your show was, in my opinion. Would that be fair?
I would like to think so, and you were saying about what goes through your mind when you're awarding stars. The sad thing, if you're a critic, is that that if you put 3 stars on top of something, that many people won't read it. You think, oh, that's just an average 3-star show, I won't bother reading with that. Actually, there could be all sorts of interesting stuff going on within it, but for some reason it doesn't. It doesn't hit the mark in some particular respect, and that's a weird thing as a writer, knowing that you're deliberately writing something advertised as don't bother reading this, and I say that as someone, for example, I don't write about music, but I like music, and so when whatever it might be, the Guardian on a Friday has music reviews, so I'll read quite a lot of music reviews, but the ones I read are the ones that are 4-star and 5-star, and I think, oh, I'll go on Spotify and have a listen to that myself. I'm using it as someone who has a casual interest in music, but I'm not as young as I was, and I'm not listening to it all. I need some sort of guidance. So why would I bother listening to a 3-star record? I haven't got enough time to do that. And
So you do the same thing as we do.
So I do it the same. So
Yeah.
it would be hypocritical of me to criticise anyone else doing that to my review and insist that they read every beautiful word that I write.
Definitely. And what are your? I mean, this is coming from a theatre angle. I should point out, because you only review theatre. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So, are there many? I don't know this because I'm comedy, so I'm literally asking you now. Are there many?
Are there many theatres?
No. Are there any theatres in the country? No. Are there many student reviewers in? Because when you go to Edinburgh, there are a lot of student reviewers for things like the List and 3 Weeks and stuff.
Yeah.
Who get employed to fill in the gaps from the professionals like you who've been going long enough that you can't go and see everything. It's not physically possible, and obviously they want to get as many things reviewed as possible so that people go to their website.
Yeah.
I totally get that. But then you've got the downside of, these people don't have as much experience. Now, comedy generally is the stuff they want to cover because it's a very heavily comedy slanted festival.
Yeah.
Is it the same in theatre, or is there enough, is there so little, not little theatre, but there's so much less theatre there that you can get round enough of it that they don't need student reviewers?
It would be interesting to analyse exactly how that broke down. What I would say is sort of yes, you do get a lot of young reviewers, and in some ways theatre is more vulnerable to this because it's quite difficult to you have to put in the legwork if you're going to to have any authority as a theatre critic. You have to go and see plays. Basically, you can't. If you're writing about music, then you can listen to the radio, and if you're writing about cinema, everybody's always watching films on the telly or whatever. And these days, even stand-up, this wasn't always true, but stand-up now you can watch live at the Apollo or whatever, so you can have a pretty good range, even without trying, and have a pretty good sense of the landscape. With theatre, you have to go to theatres, and so it's slightly easier, I think, if you're starting out, to be caught out through your ignorance about, you're always seeing people saying this is the most amazing show ever, possibly like the person I was just talking about, because it's the only thing you've seen ever, and getting that, calibrating it in such a way to understand what's good and what's brilliant is harder. As someone, I edited the List magazine for 3 years, from 2000 to 2003, and had also been the theatre editor before that, and sort of in charge of a lot of the Fringe operation. And it really seemed to me that there were more people who wanted to write about pop music, films. Actually, maybe not comedy at the time, but possibly that might have changed. I think there's maybe more people who would write comedy now than there were theatre, anyway. And so it was quite rare to come across somebody who seemed to know what they were talking about and wanted to write about theatre. That seemed to be quite rare. So it's different, but probably very similar to the thing that you're talking about. Because I don't know. I think the thing about comedy is that if you go in and you laugh, then there's a. I don't know, it's a bit more cut and dry, doesn't it? Either you laughed or you didn't laugh. You couldn't say a show was funnier than the audience found it. It can only be that funny, can't it? So whereas if you were an art reviewer going to an art gallery, you can claim that this thing has all sorts of profundities and hidden meanings that you saw, and maybe you did see them, that maybe other people didn't see. Whereas it'd be quite hard to say this thing was really, really funny when nobody was laughing. That's quite a hard case to make.
Yeah, it's quite hard to tell, but I've had friends of mine who have got really good reviews, and they've openly said to me, I didn't think that was going to get a good review because they weren't laughing very hard. It wasn't like it was an awkward room or whatever.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It's one of those things where if you can see that it was funny, but the room was awkward, or the audience weren't getting it, or there was just something, just anything, like variably wise, that just wasn't working. Because often with comedy, there's a mob mentality that builds with a show, especially. So you start off sort of small, and eventually everyone sort of is on one page where they kind of understand your worldview, and they're melding to that worldview or whatever you're doing. And so as a result, if they're not really going for it, but you are going for it, you sort of feel a little bit like, I don't want to laugh. I don't want everyone thinking I've got a shit sense of humour if no one else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you're the
and I do say one of the fantastic things about the reason I really love writing about what I will call live art. It doesn't really matter whether it's theatre or comedy or whatever it is. It's the liveness, and that what you were just saying has put me in mind. I think it was 2 Fringes ago. I'm going to forget the comedian, but for some reason it was one of those mad Fringe nights where one thing led to another. And scene 1, I'm at the Assembly Rooms on George Street watching I'd snuck in at the back watching some sort of stand-up variety charity raising type thing, and then scene 2 not long, maybe half an hour later, ending up at the Stan Comedy Club, where the same comedian was doing the same set that it was someone like Robin Ince, I can't remember who it was doing the same set. Or David O'Doherty, I think it might have been.
Oh, the DOD, yeah.
He had gone down perfectly well at the Assembly Rooms, but you saw him in the stand and it was just amazing. And it was and what was fantastic about it was seeing it on the same night and seeing just how by being in a smaller space with a group of comedy aficionados who are slightly more tuned into it, how different those two experiences were. And I'm sure everybody in the Assembly Room said, oh yeah, that guy was really great. I'm sure that they would have had a good experience, but I can tell you the experience was that much better seeing him at the stand in a small, or for all of those atmospheric reasons. And if you're writing about theatre or any live art on a night by night basis, if I was reviewing you doing a gig, then there's so many different factors that might influence your performance, my mood, the audience's mood, the relationship that you have with the audience, how closely tight-knit they are, how distant you are from them physically within the building, how what the news about the election is in the newspapers, whether everybody's really annoyed about something, whether they're troubled by a natural disaster in another country, and all of those things could potentially have some interplay on your particular performance that particular night, and it will be different the next night. And there isn't really a right or wrong about that. It was just, this is what it was like when I was there that night.
It's the moment.
Yeah.
And the Stand Comedy Club are known for bringing in quite comedy aficionados.
Yeah.
They're kind of very focused on the performer and making sure that, especially, I was looking into their booking, not their booking policy, their payment policy and stuff for the Fringe, and they're very much trying to make sure that the comedian doesn't go home in debt. That's their main thing, and it's really nice. So I imagine that when he's doing that show, DOD in this case, when you're doing that and you've got sort of less worry on your mind, maybe because you're doing a gig that you're not going to go home $5,000 in debt, and everyone in the room to come maybe for your name a bit more, and so there's all kind of stuff that can come into it.
And comedians will talk about the Edinburgh Fringe in particular, is that you're, for the rest of the year you might be playing to hen nights or whatever it might be, people who are there because their mates have said, oh, let's go along to see this thing. On the Fringe, you've got people who are comedy fans, and they are particularly at somewhere like the Stand, and maybe the Gilded Balloon and so on as well. You've got people who are there because they really, really, really like comedy, and that level of attentiveness and so on means that people do much more interesting, elaborate hour-long sets that they just wouldn't be able to use anywhere else, because there isn't, they would have to go to art centres or something, because there isn't the same market for that.
Yeah, definitely. And when you're reviewing something, do you take, because obviously you go for free essentially, so do you take into account the ticket price when you're reviewing it?
I don't, and I'm quite not everyone agrees with me on this, but I kind of think, well, I know what I find is an expensive ticket, but I don't know what you find is an expensive ticket, and how in what way would I might discover that a show is outrageously expensive, what I think is outrageously expensive, but I don't know how I would, and I might comment on that, but I don't know how I would assess the nature of a work in relationship to the money. But I think because it's that just sort of commodifies everything, and I'm ultimately I'm not trying to give the sort of user guide that you might get on Amazon. I'm buying a washing machine, so you have certain parameters. You've got a budget of £500, and you want it to be able to do spin drying as well as whatever else a washing machine can do. And therefore, an expert on washing machines can tell you, well, actually, if you get this one for £500, it can do this. If you've got a little bit more money, it can do some other bells and whistles, and that can be a fairly clear relationship. But if I'm reviewing a show, think if it was musicals. So how would I know that you had a certain budget? I don't know what that is. And how would I also know that this could be the only show that you might go to all year? So that therefore spending £100 to go and see Phantom of the Opera might be a better investment than if you were going 3 nights a week. And then on top of that, well, how do I know that you're going to like a show that's about cats or a show that's set in a monastery somewhere? There are, if I'm really trying to be a consumer guide in that way, I think that's why I'm talking about being a consumer guide, because if you start talking about money, then you are a consumer guide, and unless you've got a very, very clear idea of who your readers are, I really don't know how you would judge that. Apart from in the broader sense that, this is free, that seems like a good deal, and the Free Fringe is the prime example of that, because you really don't lose anything, and you have the opportunity to give a fiver at the end if you want to. Do people give you a fiver at the end of a Free Fringe gig?
Some do.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where this is off topic and I'll probably edit it out, but the first year I went up, I got a lot of student people coming in, like very young, literally they were all about teenagers, maybe early 20s, who came and very rarely donated, but all seemed to be having a good time.
Yeah.
And then last year I did my whole show for charity, so the bucket was prostate cancer's bucket, and I would have broken even essentially, but it all went to prostate cancer. So I don't know
so
if it was, so I don't know if it was, because I knew how much I was going to, because the thing is, it did me a lot of good, because it meant that I had to budget better, and it means that I now budget better this year, which is great, because you sort of think, if I spend £1 there, it's £1, but then it just adds up, and you sort of think about it differently.
But I suppose you also don't know whether they were giving it because it was prostate cancer, rather than it wasn't very funny, but it's prostate cancer. Come on, could be the motivation.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like, some people, they didn't donate and they didn't give stuff, and I don't know whether that's because they didn't find it funny, or because they don't like the charity, or something else. So I'll find out this year whether I'm shit. That'll be fun.
Think of a new reason why they won't pay.
You'll see, Bruce will be seeing me having another breakdown in September. That's going to be fun. So you review for a lot of different places. You're freelance.
Yeah, I'm freelance, and I'm a gun for hire. Yeah.
So do you, when you are coming to review someone in Edinburgh, for example, do you email ahead of time and say, I'm coming, and by the way, I'm reviewing for this publication? Or is that not necessary and you don't need to do that?
Well, actually, if we're sticking on the topic of the Free Fringe, that raises all sorts of interesting dilemmas. One of which, there's really no reason to alert anybody, because the Free Fringe shows are rarely sold out, and you're not paying money anyway. So
never come to see one of mine. Clearly. I mean,
well, maybe they are. Yeah. So you go along to a Free Fringe show. There's no need to get the ticket in advance, and very few Free Fringe shows have press officers attached to them anyway. It'll just be the performer themselves, and then you're in the dilemma thinking, well, I'm, whatever you thought of the show, I'm thinking, well, I'm probably certainly earning more than this person is performing. So you feel bad about just exploiting them. It feels like you're exploiting them, even though you might be there professionally. So I tend to give money when I go to a Free Fringe show, even if I'm technically, I wouldn't do if it was a paid for show, if you see what I mean. So that's very specific to the Free Fringe, though. But in general, I will go to either the press officer associated with the company or the press officer associated with the venue. So if I go to the Travis Theatre has a year-round press officer, and during the festival takes on assistants as well, and they're the person I go to, and then they're sort of in control of you. Then they give you the ticket, and they know what you're doing. They'll probably say, well, who are you reviewing it for? Is it all that? And that I think from a performance point of view, that gives a very useful distance between the critic and the artist, because if there's any complaint, then there's somebody in the middle who can deal with that, or whatever the opposite of complaint is. If there's any issue whatsoever, then there's no embarrassment about. There's someone in the middle to act as a sort of buffer.
So do you think there are too many middlemen or middlewomen in comedy, or in performance in general? Let's ask that.
It's tempting to say yes when you look at the way that arts administration has gone. Probably not so much in comedy venues, because they tend to work because they're at the commercial end of the market. It seems to me that the more commercial you go in the market, the leaner and meaner the staff are, because they can't afford any, they can't afford people with sort of poncy titles. They have to just get on with the job and sell the tickets to the customers and get out there. It's very difficult to say this, because there's lots of lovely people who seem to be doing lots of interesting and worthwhile jobs.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats in the Royal Festival Hall. The performance begins in 1 minute.
I think we'll be all right now. The performance is going to start in 1 minute.
1 minute.
Yeah.
But it does seem to me that there are more people employed in in theatres now than there were 20 years ago, and I wonder what they're all doing, and are they, bringing more audiences in. Your question specifically is a comedy. I suppose there is, and I become aware of it during the Edinburgh Fringe, is that there is this industry associated with comedy, which has really built up again over the past 20-25 years, where people have realised, the big comedy agencies have realised that if you nurture younger comedians at the start of their career, they can eventually be doing things on Dave, within a few years, and so there's big money to be had, and so because
please take your seats in the Royal Festival Hall.
Starts in 12 seconds.
Is about to begin.
because the Edinburgh it's like being in the Wicker Man with this thing over the back. Because the Edinburgh Fringe is a testing ground and just historically has become that thing, then there's a huge concentration of press officers, PR people, I don't know who they all are, who ultimately can make money from it, and I think most of them seem to live in London, and they all arrive in Edinburgh every summer, and because it is an industry, and industries need people to work for it. So whether that means there are too many, I don't know, but it quite possibly limits the possibility of spontaneity, or the whole system has become more formalised than it was once. It's less possible to be completely eccentric, I think, in a way that it was. And now this is a tangent, but I was the theatre editor at the List magazine in the early 1990s, and at that point the comedy circuit was such year round that it wasn't even called comedy, it was called cabaret, and it was a subsection of the theatre section. So as the theatre editor, I was also responsible for doing the what were then called the cabaret listings, and there would be people like Alan Cumming and Forbes Masson, who were in a double act called Victor and Barry, who would play actually typically in theatre venues, but like in a bar, like the Theatre Bar or whatever. Craig Ferguson, who's recently completed a big run as a American television chat show, and his sister Lynn Ferguson, who was in a double act called the Alexander Sisters. But there was a small number of people who have gone on to do big things subsequently, and eventually a comedy collective called the Funny Farm was established in Glasgow and Scotland in general, with people like Bruce Morton, and Fred Macaulay was part of that. Is this recording? Have you got any of this?
I hope so.
Am I there now?
We are there now.
I am on a big tangent anyway.
It's definitely. That's it. Please do finish it, because I have something to say at the end of it. Go
okay.
on.
So I was just talking about the Funny Farm, and now I'm thinking about it. Some very well-established names such as Fred Macaulay and Bruce Morton were part of that, and it was the first signs of comedy becoming something more than just this thing that happened on a Friday night in some art centre somewhere, and eventually, the history of, I'm talking about Scotland, the history of comedy in Scotland was then people like Karen Corran, who runs the Gilded Balloon. She was always trying to put on, or was putting on, things through the year. Maybe someone like Jerry Sadovich, she would tour. But then subsequently the big success story was the Stand Comedy Club, which now operates in Glasgow, Newcastle and Edinburgh, with some sort of additional tours around that, as well as its Fringe operation, and the Glasgow Comedy Festival. So all of that has mushroomed hugely, so that I think it would now be possible to sustain, for some people, to sustain a career as a stand-up comedian in Scotland in a way that would just be absurd 25 years ago.
Do you mean like independently, like on their own, or you mean
think
with?
So, there's a few people who could do it. I mean, maybe they'll be like you, having a day job as well as doing gigs, but there are gigs to be had.
Yeah, definitely. There's a circuit that's built outside of the Fringe, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I interviewed Peter downstairs at the King's Head. I don't know if you've ever been to that gig, and he was talking about how he still sees very much his gig as a cabaret night, because he has variety on rather than comedy.
But
because a lot of the acts come down and do something funny, they sort of associate it as a comedy night.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because he started, 25, 30 years ago with just one night, and now he's obviously built it up. And like he said, we've got a recording studio across the road, so sometimes, bands will just come across and they'll want to play like a jam session after doing a day's worth of recording, and we'll put them on at the end. And he's like, I never call it headlining, I always call it at the end, because I hate that as well, because it's not a gig like that. It's like this kind of thing. So it's very interesting, like how these things have grown up, as it were.
Yeah.
And become, especially comedy, when it was cabaret, and now we sort of have lost that in a way.
Mm-hmm. And because of the commercial imperative, one person on the microphone is about the cheapest form of entertainment you can get, and because it's also very popular when it's big. It's a funny mixture, comedy, I think, because in some ways you can feel a bit cultish if you go to somewhere like the King's Head or the Stand on a Tuesday night. But on the other hand, it's Michael McIntyre, and it's the Palladium and thousands of people tuning in to the repeats on Dave. So it's an odd mixture of the very, very mainstream and the opposite of that.
Yeah, and I mean a big chunk of your book, or a big chunk at the start of your book, is about, and I'm not revealing anything, so don't worry, it's not a spoiler, but a big part of the chunk of it was, which I really liked, was setting your target for what you want from Edinburgh.
Yeah. Because
I'm not putting words in your mouth because it's not the way you describe it, but the way I took it was treat Edinburgh like a springboard for something bigger than Edinburgh, which is weird because as a performer I often think Edinburgh is the biggest thing of the year. And it's interesting that you say that some people go, they know that if they nurture this person they can put them on Dave in a few months' time or whatever. Do you think I assume it's not happening as much in theatre, but do you think that's necessarily a good target or like a good thing that's happening? Because
I think the target probably has to just to be realistic, and it doesn't really matter. The point that the book makes, which is a point that the Fringe office, I've sort of nicked it from the Fringe office, and the Fringe office is very sort of keen on this, and I don't know if Neil was saying the same sort of thing, Neil McKinnon, when you interviewed him last week, but it's having a sense. It doesn't really matter what your ambition is, but it's having a clear idea of what that ambition is, and realistic ambition. So, for example, if the thing that you want to get out of the Fringe as a student group of comedy improvisers is to do your show 30 nights on the trot and get laid every night and then get drunk, that is a perfectly worthwhile ambition, but as you have to know what that is.
Achievable.
Yeah, maybe you can't get laid, but you can get drunk for sure. And if you've decided that that's your ambition, then maybe even writing it down on a piece of paper will then help you make all the other subsequent decisions. So if your ambition is to get drunk every night and then go back to university to finish your degree, why would you spend £1,000 on a marketing campaign? It would make no sense, because you wouldn't get any drunker with thousands. You could spend that £1,000 on beer. That would be a more useful thing to spend it on. It might also influence the money that you spent on accommodation, or the whole attitude. If you do want to, but if your ambition is to get a series on Channel 4 or a pilot or whatever, then all of the decisions you make will be reflected in that. And so for someone like that, the money that you spend in Edinburgh is an investment on your future career and something that might happen in 3 years' time, or so you maybe should be budgeting for 3 years, not 1 year. That was the point I was making in that chapter there. Just know what your goals are, make them attainable, and then answer all the subsequent questions from that knowledge.
Yeah, and I really like how it keeps referencing back to it, saying, remember that goal, remember that. Because, for me, for example, I've got some marketing ideas, which I'm not going to reveal on here yet, but it's kind of those things where I'm like, can I afford this £100? And then the question for me, because of what my goal aims are for the Fringe, are not, can I afford this £100? It's, can I afford not to spend this £100 because I want people to come and see it, and because I want something out the end of the other end of it. I was speaking to a group of theatre makers the other day, and we sort of went through it. It was like a workshop, Edinburgh Fringe workshop, and I got them to imagine a show, just completely off the top of their heads, imagine a show that they might bring to the Edinburgh Fringe, and then, having done that, to then imagine how they might go about selling it, who they might want to get in their audience, who they might want to, what they might want to do with it afterwards, all of those sort of questions. And it was interesting that because artists get used to they are poor, they get used to thinking
about money and so on. And the ideas that they were coming up with were really very modest, and they were achievable. But we'll just do 3 nights. It'll just be a one-man show. Everything was very small, and I just thought, this is a fantasy exercise. You could have invented a 20-strong troupe of jugglers and that would perform for 5 hours, but you didn't. And I think there is a danger of, if you always put the limits at the beginning of your imagination, rather than saying, I've got this fantastic idea for a show, whether it's comedy, folk, theatre, whatever it might be, then you might end up just limiting it, just not really doing the thing that you really want to do. Whereas if you think, well, the thing I really want to do is, and whatever it might be, let's find a way of doing that. Let's find a way of making that possible. And yes, it might cost a lot of money. Yes, it might need you mortgaging the house or whatever, but at least getting a sense of what is possible. Or you might then decide, well, why go to Edinburgh at all? Maybe I could achieve the same for in more conducive terms in some other place. That could be another decision that you make. Nobody's obliging you to go to Edinburgh.
Yeah, I think it kind of, you sort of feel a little bit of a pull factor. I feel like everyone around the Fringe, application time, regardless of genre, goes, well, it's, there's applications, I might as well apply, and then, decide later on, and then by the time you get accepted, you go, well, I've been accepted now, I might as well.
Better write a show.
Yeah, so it's sort of a weird sort of vortex that we all get sucked into.
And it's also fantastic. I mean,
I'm not criticising it at all. Yeah.
I couldn't miss it. It's my Christmas.
Is there, because you go every year. You've been...
Well, I live in Edinburgh, and I think really the reason the reason I'm in Edinburgh in the first place was I came to work in the Fringe office after being a student, and I just stayed. But as a result of that, I'm not joking when I say it's my Christmas, because it does come around every year, and it was the reason I'm there in the first place, and it's very exciting. So, why be anywhere else in the world? I really don't know where I would be.
Yeah.
Or why I would be there.
Yeah, definitely. And in the book, you talked a bit about, we were talking about earlier, social media and marketing and strategies and things like that. Obviously, since it was 2012, was the book out?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the last 3 years, obviously, social media has become so much more for performers. Yeah. I mean, how have you seen that evolve since you originally wrote about it?
I think it must have changed in that intervening time. We've got Periscope now, haven't we? Have you used Periscope?
No. Is that a social media thing?
Periscope has been is a company bought by Twitter, and it basically allows you to do what we're doing now, but live on video. So it's just a very simple application, and if right now I could have my phone up and I haven't actually done it yet. I've watched other people do it. I'll show you after the interview. But whether or not you could do that for your show, I don't know. So social media surely has changed in the time since I wrote the book, but probably the principles are a bit are similar, which is coming back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that if you just send out a load of tweets saying come and see my show, come and see my show, come and see my show, people just get very, very pissed off with it and stop reading your tweets. Whereas if you find a way of stoking a conversation around your work, and that isn't necessarily easy to do, and some work will probably find itself easier to do, but make people interested in you, then that could pay off in the long term. I'm thinking of an example I did give in the book, which is of a friend of mine who's a jazz singer, and she just as I was writing the book, she was also doing her first Fringe show. She's an experienced singer, but she'd never done a Fringe show before, and so it was quite interesting we were both sort of comparing ideas with each other as we worked towards our different deadlines. And one of the things that she did, she lives in Edinburgh, and she did gigs in people's houses, like a house party, and that she would get people to invite their friends round and ask them for whatever it would be, a £5, £10 donation for the entertainment. And so she would then have whatever it would be in a party, 30, 40 people who would hear her set, but and would pay for her to be there, so she could earn a little bit of money to cover her costs, not a huge amount, but a little bit of amount. But then she would then have a group of people who had a vested interest in her show and would then come and see the show afterwards. And so if you can generate basically a fan base in whatever way you can, maybe in your case telling jokes, or 140 character jokes, if that's possible, that just making people interested in you, I think that's an easy and cheap and a free thing to do if you can think in the right way about it.
Yeah. I'm sort of doing that. It's not
Yeah.
going as well as it's sort of slowed down recently, and you sort of have this. It's why I've sort of cut down on social media, because so you're building a following, you're getting loads of people, and you check it every 5 minutes, and you go, oh, I got 2 new followers.
Yeah.
Oh, but I lost 6 or something, and it just does something bad to your self-esteem and your psyche, and you.
And I do think the thing that I need to keep on reminding myself is that just because you've got 500 people following you on Twitter doesn't mean everybody knows about your book, because or your gig or whatever it is. It feels like everybody knows because everybody in your little closed circuit knows about it. But then I'm always having conversations. Oh, you're writing a book, and you think, surely I've been going on about it forever. But of course, not everybody is listening to you, and there are many people who aren't on Twitter. There are many people who are on Twitter and aren't reading it, and who missed the things that you were sending out, or Facebook or whatever it might be. So old school media old school marketing is still valuable. And
I still have this discussion daily with different brands where I say, and with people in general, like I'm doing a lot of work with performers at the moment because of the book I'm writing, but also just in general. And all the time I say to them, look, get their email address. My favourite statistic of all time, right, in digital marketing terms, is people change their physical address more often than their email address.
Is that right?
Yeah. So, well, think about how many times have you changed it?
Yeah. No,
if you, we might have had, Little Miss whatever, not 16, 18, 4, whatever, like a really shitty name with like numbers next to it when we were 15, but then you change to something legitimate and you're stuck with it, and you live with that for the rest of your life essentially, and but you want to move house a lot, or London house prices mean you have to, so it's one of those things where if you get their email address, and also people read their emails. Like, I don't read every tweet, but I will read every email. And so you think to yourself, why are people not doing that more? Because the amount of times I work with brands, and you send a Facebook message out to 100,000 people, and only 10,000 people in the analytics have seen it, and they go, oh, but we had 100. Why haven't we seen it? And I'm like, send it to their email, and I guarantee they'll bloody read it. Yeah. Even if they don't like it and they get really annoyed by you, they'll bloody read it.
And I suppose the only bit of advice there is to make sure that you don't besiege people with so many emails that they just stop reading. They think, oh, here's another one from Simon Caine. I'm not going to read that one because he was talking bollocks last time. He's still talking bollocks this time. It has to be something that people might actually want to read.
Well, yeah, I've set up for the podcast, I've set up a newsletter for patrons of the podcast, so they'll get like an email telling them what's coming up and who's coming on and all this kind of stuff, and they can also email me back because it's from my email. So they can email me back and say, can you ask this person this question for me? And I'll do that because they're supporting the podcast either way, but also because it's the nice thing to do, and it adds like you said, it adds that dialogue.
And that is also, the amazing thing about Twitter is that you can get access to all sorts of people because it is individuals. As far as I know, it is Stephen Fry who was doing his own tweets. Yeah. So obviously he had so many that he surely couldn't reply to anybody. But people can get in touch with me. Not that I'm hugely famous or anything, but that guy who wrote the book. You can email me, tweet me, and I'll see it, and I might if there might be some reason that it seems that I might just choose to ignore it. But most of the time I'll tweet back and say something back, and so there's a sort of accessibility which Twitter allows, and if you've got people's emails as well that wouldn't really be possible in a previous generation, I don't think.
Yeah, totally. And do you use social media to keep in touch with or keep track of artists and performers you like?
Yes.
Or do you keep it like professional stuff where you're just following other reviewers?
Yeah. No, it'll be because often you find. It depends on at different times in my working life. I've had different outlets, and so at the moment I don't, for example, have a particular need to say. I can imagine that it might be possible that somebody, like the Glasgow Herald, might want a column about Scottish theatre gossip. They don't, but I can imagine that might be a possibility. And if that was the case, then I would continue to do what I do just out of interest, and say, oh, look, there's a playwright who I know who is doing something that is not worthy of a press release, but is noteworthy. My play's just opened in Bucharest. There could be that sort of comment that someone will make, which is quite interesting actually. And even if it doesn't lead immediately to an article that I would write, it may well feed into the next time I interview the person and say, oh, I see you've been doing, I see you're also a hill runner as well as an actor. There are certain details about your life that professional and non-professional that may well be interesting. So yes, and there's a certain, in my world of Scottish arts, there are certain discussions which happen almost exclusively on Twitter. Actually, that if a couple of years ago there was a big controversy over Creative Scotland, the equivalent of the Arts Council, and all of the conversation was happening in Facebook groups and Twitter conversations and so on, and it was a lot of pressure was put on the Creative Scotland at the time from that kind of conversation that was having, and it was as if conversations that people previously were having in pubs, everyone could listen in, and that can get quite embarrassing if you're on the wrong side of the discussion.
Yeah, I can imagine. You said in the introduction to your book that everyone should take a show to the Edinburgh Fringe once in their life, because it makes... It was
actually Mark Ravenhill who said that in the intro. It was Mark Ravenhill wrote the introduction, but it is true that was said.
All right, let's start this again.
People often assume that I've written that thing, and it is a really, really good introduction, and I'm very, very grateful for Mark Ravenhill for writing it, but it wasn't me that wrote it. However, take one show to the Edinburgh Fringe.
Would you still go along with that?
I've got no reason to disagree with it. And in fact, when I did because I was doing the book, I then thought, well, this is a bit hypocritical of me for me telling everybody else to go and put on their shows when I hadn't, since being a student, I hadn't done a show on the Fringe myself. And so I did do a show related to the book, which was a chat show, basically, 6 performances, which you can actually hear if you go to edinburghfringesurvivalguide.com. There's an audio link with the podcast's recordings of the discussions that I did, which are well worth listening to.
I will definitely link to them, as I do with everything.
This list at the bottom of your podcast is going to be very, very long.
No, it's fine. They always are.
But it was that experience of doing the show in pretty modest circumstances and pretty cushioned circumstances, because I did it at the Pleasance, and the Pleasance were very, Anthony Alderson at the Pleasance was very sort of supportive, and although I lost money, I could have lost a lot more if I'd have paid the full commercial rate. That it was fascinating to see things put into perspective. So, for example, the business about flyering. If you really believe in your show, if you coming back to what we were saying before, if you really know why you're in the Fringe, then you will really believe in your show because you know why you're there. And if you really believe in your show, then when you meet someone and you want them to come to your show, it won't be a sort of pretend marketing spiel. It will be, no, I genuinely think you should come to see my show because I think this thing will be good for you. And doesn't feel like pretense. And it was so much because I really thought the show I was doing was good, and I still think that I got some fantastic guests, and the conversations were interesting, and because I was pitching it at Fringe performers themselves, I knew who. So when I would go up to the high street, and I would look not for the audiences who were walking up and down, I would look for the performers who were handing out the flyers, because they were my market, and I knew that my show would be good for them, and I knew that my book would be good for them. So I didn't have any hesitation about going up to them and how much effect I had. Some people I think I saw in the audience afterwards, but it had limited effect. But some people seemed genuinely interested in the idea of it. And so it was interesting for me. The point I'm making is that it was interesting for me is the things that I'd said in theory in the book were then borne out in practice by doing the show. Things. I got my local greengrocer to sponsor me by providing me with a tray of fruit every day on the basis that Fringe performers don't get enough vitamin C. So, there was free fruit for the audience, and, on some occasions there was a bit left over, so I would then go to the box office, and they were very grateful to in fact, if anybody wants a business suggestion, I think go to the Edinburgh Fringe with a fruit stall, because it would do so well if you get in the right location. So the Fringe the Pleasance box office staff were very grateful for that. But if it didn't really apply to me, but if you really wanted to make good relationships with the box office staff, and why wouldn't you? Because they're selling your tickets, then give them a banana and you'll be away.
Oh, definitely. And on you have quite a detailed website for this book.
Yeah.
Like it's even got a bit chapter by chapter of what's included in the chapters.
Yeah.
do you, I mean, because we were talking just before we started recording, where you were like, well, you put a book out and then like you get like a sale here, 2 sales there, and I know that firsthand. It's really, you know what I mean? Is it? Are you tracking that? Is that like more? Did you put that in from the start, or is that like something that you thought? Well, you know, because you don't. The thing I find interesting about a book, right, is you don't buy a book because you like the book before you buy it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like with music where you can preview the music and then you go, well, I might buy that now because I want to support that artist. You buy the book because you think the book might be useful to you, or you download it illegally and then you go, well, I've read it now, it's done. Do you know what I mean? You don't usually buy it. So was it a case of you thought, well, if I was going to buy this book, I'd want to read chapter by chapter what's going to happen, or?
Yeah, I think I was thinking of entry points, and I don't really know how you know, I can see statistics for the site as a whole, but I haven't really made much distinction between one page and another. I could probably do that if I looked into it. And I think it was like a process of logic. I think I should have a website for the book. I think I should buy Edinburgh Fringe survivalguide.com, but what am I going to put on it? And the obvious, you know, if you look at the homepage now, it's got lots of quotes from what people have said. So that's, I think, probably the most persuasive thing that anybody might need. The audio thing that I was just telling you about is a nice thing to have. I find particularly now, actually, because it feels like I can be generous to someone. They can say, "Oh, I think I probably did it to your friend who tweeted me the other day." They'll say, "Oh, I've been reading this book. I've really enjoyed it." I'll say, "Oh, you know, thanks for reading it. You might also like these things."
You did,
podcasts.
Yes, yeah.
And,
they emailed me and said these were
that doesn't
great.
cost me anything. They get something out of it for nothing. And does it benefit me? I don't know. Maybe they'll then go and recommend my book to somebody else. But it's an act of generosity and sharing that you can spread around. And knowing that I've got that is good. So I think I was just trying to think, well, what shall I put on this website? Which gets around the problem that you're implying. I think that I can't just repeat the content of the book on the website, because then there'd be no point about it. So just to make it as clear as possible what's actually in this book and whether it's for you or not. Because a book called The Edinburgh Fringe Survival Guide could be aimed at audiences rather than as performance. You could get the wrong end of the stick. So. Yeah, I, you know, if I did it again, I might do it differently, but that was my thinking at the time.
That's cool. Are you planning on doing a second edition or anything? Or?
Well, it's down to the publishers. If it sells enough, then I mean, actually, I did look at it the other day, and because I'd got into my head that so many people have changed jobs, and for example, at the point I wrote it. There was a very, very strict embargo on when the Fringe programme came out in June, but now there's stuff already on the website for 2015. So that, you know, there are details like that changed. But I sort of skimmed through it, and I realised actually the basic message of it is still the same. So it doesn't feel to me that there's an urgent need to update it. But if I did update it, I would be able to say, you know, former person who used to do this job is now this, or maybe, you know, do a fresh set of interviews. But I interviewed something like 70 people for it, and I knew at the time that I could interview a completely different 70 people who would all say things that were both different and the same, which is like the basic message would be the same, the detail of everybody's experience would be different.
Oh, totally, yeah. Everyone has a different Fringe.
Yeah. And you all have something to say about it.
Yes, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And there was a really good bit about, because like I said, for last year for me, budgeting was so key, because I knew I was never going to make anything out of any of it.
Yeah.
And you had a really good chapter on day-to-day budgeting, as well as overall budgeting for the show. And I mean, do you think, because a lot of performers came back last year, especially comedians, and they just were in debt regardless of the fact they sold out a lot of shows.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a thing that maybe had an impact on it, or do you think that's just something that performers don't, because you're up there and you just get into the vibe of the Fringe and you just forget that you maybe need to budget every day? Or
yeah, it's a tricky thing, and it's easy for me to be arrogant and sort of say, oh yes, you should, but you shouldn't go home with less money than you thought you would do. But I think the Fringe office's line is that, you know, be realistic about your targets. Don't expect to get more than 30% attendance or 40%. It's quite a low figure you would set yourself in terms of box office and so on. Anticipate all of those other problems, and you know, if you're doing it on on anything less than a professional level, to think of it as a holiday, and you know, you would if you went to Tenerife, you would have a certain amount of money for flights and accommodation and food when you got there, and beer and whatever else. So it shouldn't be any different to that. You spend the money, but you you shouldn't need to mortgage a house. You should be in control of that. But of course things happen, so it is expensive. You should go in with your eyes open, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And was it a case of you wrote the book and then you went to a publisher, or they came to you and said, we'd like you to write a book, or what was the...
No, what happened is I have a man of many websites. I have a website called theatrescotland.com, and Anna Brewer, who's my editor at Methuen Drama, it was her idea. She'd had this idea. She thought there should be a book about how to do a show on the Fringe. And I think she got in touch with a number of people with a proposal that she'd drawn up, and on spec, not knowing me, she got in touch with me via my website. So this is an example. We were talking about the benefits of social media or whatever. If you've got a website, maybe the editor from Methuen Drama will get in touch with you with this idea. And initially it was just... I'll give you for a small amount of money. Would you like to comment on this brief that I've come up with? So I said, well, that's I can do that. And she had a number of questions about how such a book, whether such a book was viable, but how it should be structured. And one of her questions was, well, who should write this book, and should it be one person or many people? And of course, I think I said before, I'm a freelance writer, gun for hire. So my natural response was, I think one person should do it, and I think it should be me. And I think my boldness slightly took her aback, but she went with it. And so it does feel like the book I was born to write in many ways, because I have lived and breathed the Fringe for so long. But it sort of came by fluke, and I hadn't planned to write a book, and I didn't. A book is a big thing, and then oddly, once you do this big thing, and I remember thinking when the book was nearly completed, I wonder what my next book will be. Suddenly this thing becomes possible. I imagine it's like doing your first hour-long set on anywhere. You kind of think, I wonder what my next hour-long set will be. And so that was the point when I just sent an email back to Anna again saying, would you like a book about theatre criticism? And I think my email was no longer than that. And she said, yes! And so that one came out of that. So a bit, again, you were talking about the book that you were doing, and it was very much on a sort of casual conversation like that. That sounds like a good idea, let's go for it.
Yeah, mine was a lot more casual than yours, it sounds. Mine was just literally, I wrote for them for a bit, and then they said, do you want to write... Well, I didn't even say, do you want to write a book? I said, I've written a book, which was half true at the time, if I'm honest. Because I'd written enough of the outlay of the book that I knew it could be a book.
Fill it in, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'd done the contents page, which I find the easiest thing to do in the book at the start, to make sure you've got the chapters. And then I'd bullet pointed out what I want to do in each chapter. And I'd probably written like 2 out of every 5 bullet points in the whole thing. So I'd sent them a chunk of work, and then they could see what else I wanted to write about. And then they said, oh, we'd love to buy that. And that was the whole conversation. And I feel like we're painting a very bad, really easy picture of because I've got friends of mine who've got book ideas.
I've been desperate.
And they're going to be sitting there going, well, I'll just email them then. I'll just go, I've got a book.
How about this? And it is a strange thing, but I think probably that thing about it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, actually, it's both, isn't it? You need to know.
You need to know
stuff.
something, yeah.
And
or your book will be shit.
But having but I think to bring it back to the Fringe and to the people who might be listening to this podcast, the people who, if you're a performer wanting to do a show on the Fringe, it's very easy, or anywhere, it's very easy to imagine that the reviewers, the venue managers, the agents, any of these people that you might want to be dealing with and engaging with in your professional career, you might very easy to imagine that these people are this sort of group of monsters who are only in it for themselves, have no interest in you, are some other alien species. But actually, almost universally, we're all doing it because we really like it. I mean, I like going to the theatre. I want to see good stuff, whether it's comedy, theatre, whatever it might be. And I think that is generally true. If you're running a venue, why wouldn't you want good shows in your venue? So if you've got a good show, come to the venue that wants to put on good shows. So you've got. If I want to write as a journalist, I want to write about interesting stories. If you've got an interesting story, why wouldn't I want to write about you? Of course, there are many people who don't have interesting stories, whose shows might not be that very journalistically interesting. But I think on the whole, people are receptive to the possibility that something good might be happening. And if you genuinely believe that you've got something good, then why not?
Yeah, definitely. No, I'll tell you how this podcast started, because I don't think I've told anyone this before, right? I got really annoyed at the end of the Fringe last year because a few agents came to see me, a few reviewers came to see me, and after sort of they left the show, I sort of said, "Oh, do you want to go for a drink? Do you want to hang out?" And they'd all be like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And obviously, as the Fringe happens, it doesn't always happen. And I sort of got a bit like, I would really genuinely like to get to know some people. I'd really like to actually spend time with people who I'm hoping to have a long-term, either friendship with or workmate friendship with.
Yeah.
And also, you, as in your case, someone who's been doing it for 25, 30 years, have so much information that I'm sure, like I'm assuming you're enjoying this right now.
I'm actually tied down to the chair at the moment.
Well, no, but it's just this wisdom and information that doesn't always have an outlet for, and I feel like it's useful for a lot of people. And then and it just feels like there's nowhere for that to come out. And so I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll start. I'll spend an inordinate.
And I think there just needs to be more of it, because I'm sort of continually surprised, I suppose, that people come and you see them on Facebook, you see them on social media, you see them in Fringe roadshows in particular, where people are asking these questions that I'm thinking, didn't I answer that last year, and didn't I answer the year before? There is a sort of sum of knowledge, but many people don't have that knowledge, and I know some stuff. So you've had experiences yourself. You know other stuff, but passing on that knowledge, it does actually feel quite good when someone has a question and you have the answer to it. It feels nice.
Yeah, definitely. Other than your book, obviously, which books or which recommended reading material, or even just media in general, would you recommend people look up if they were looking at doing a show?
The thing that I'm often surprised about is how little some people make use of the Fringe office. The Fringe Society is just a fantastic opportunity, and people, you often get people saying, "Oh, it's outrageous that I have to pay whatever it is, £300, £400 to join the Fringe Society," because partly because all they see is the entry in the Fringe program, and that seems like a lot of money, but actually what you're paying, what that £400-300 is covering, is the whole box office opportunity to actually sell your tickets. But not just that, there is a wealth of the sort of shared knowledge that we're talking about, which is open to you at any time that you want to, whether in person or over the phone or whatever it might be. People can talk about give you advice about venues, give you advice about marketing, and also give you advice about your future career. There's a really good, welcoming, dedicated team of people who know a lot of stuff at the Fringe office. And in addition to all the PDF things you can download from the performer section of the Fringe website, and my book has given colour to a lot of the standard information that the Fringe office produces. But basically, that information is the stuff that you need. I start with the Fringe office and make use of it because you're paying for it.
Yeah, Neil. When I had Neil on, he was just the first thing he said to me was, "It's just not getting used."
Yeah.
Like it was literally I was like, "What do you mean?" And he just went, "Well, we have a full service PR section. We have links with journalists and recruiters reviewers and all kinds of stuff. And no one ever comes to us or talks to us or
it's not exactly that nobody does, but because the people who do use it make very, very good use, good use of it. And Fringe Central, which is the venue the Fringe office runs during the Fringe itself, it's always very buzzy with people around. But I just know, I think sometimes what might happen is that if you've got say you've got a sketch comedy group with 4 people in it, that one of them will probably be the one who fills in the form and makes contact with the Fringe office, and then consequently the other 3 and the technical person are a little bit out of the loop and not even aware that is a thing that could happen. And that's the only thing, that's my only explanation, because it's a fantastic service and you're paying for it anyway.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's pretty much answered everything.
Everything
to do with the Fringe. Well, there was a few other tiny things, but I don't know how much you want to answer things like about the Free Fringe, because I'm assuming that would be mainly your leisure going to that rather than.
Yeah, well, you can probably tell me more about it than I can tell you.
Okay,
maybe that's what people want to know.
Well, there was.
The one thing I could say about the Free Fringe is linking back to something I was saying earlier, which is about where you're positioning yourself as an artist, and the value of the free fringe is that it's free, and that's a very, very good thing, and you can get experience and so on. But it might, and I stress might, also be projecting something about where you see yourself in the sort of hierarchy of performers, and are you a professional or are you an amateur? That question could be in the air, and so you might think, well, yes, of course it will cost more to do the fringe in a different way, but maybe that is actually what I should be doing as a professional.
That's interesting, because a lot of comedy reviewers I've spoken to have said that the especially the general audience and themselves, because they go to everything, the perception has changed quite a lot recently with the free fringe.
That is true as well.
So, I mean, then there's a lot of, because of the cost of the big four, for example, a lot of them have moved back to the free fringe because they get just as good rooms.
Yeah.
Although, yes, you sort of have to deal with a lot of stuff yourself because you don't have the PR help and you don't have all that other stuff. But then if you have a good show, there's always that to say, if your show's good enough, it can build
and you can
its
do
word
other
of mouth.
things. Phil Jupitus has done his paid-for shows, but he's done his shows at the Jam House, I think, as Porky the Poet. Yeah.
So that was good. I like that.
So I am making a huge generalisation. I'm not even making a generalisation. I'm just saying it's a question to think about. Where you see yourself. Are you a pleasant sort of performer? Are you a gilded balloon sort of performer? Are you a free fringe sort of performer? It's not a right or wrong answer to it, but it's a question that you should ask probably.
There was one other thing I was going to say actually. Given you have been going to the fringe, how many years now?
Since 86.
86, so 28 years. I'm 20. That was my birth year, so that's the only reason I'm good at maths.
Keeping track of it.
Yeah. So 28 years. Do you think there's a reason why the comedy section has built up so much? Do you think it's like a chicken and egg that, we as performers are going there so the industry follows it, or we're going up there because the industry are going up there, and in a way, do you think it's not bullying, but do you think there's a certain element that the comedy is sort of pushing out other areas of arts that?
Yeah, well, I've said this already in terms of the cost of it. It is cheaper to have one person and a microphone than someone trying to put on a Shakespeare play, for example. And in addition to that, comedy is popular. So if you're trying to minimise your risk as a fringe promoter, then it would seem that there is less risk putting one person on the microphone and getting a big audience than putting on an unknown piece of theatre involving several people. The costs have to go around there. I will say, in defence of theatre, if you look at, when I was first going to the fringe, the theatre was the biggest section. But even now, if you look in purely in terms of numbers, if you added the fringe, if you added the theatre section with the kids section, kids generally dramatic form. Cabaret has recently become a separate section. Is it comedy? Is it theatre? There's a sort of grey area there. And dance and physical theatre has a lot of things that you would call theatre within it. And if you add those things together, this is a bit like the election coming up. If you add all the minor parties together, you actually get a bit. It is still bigger than comedy. And it's not, theatre on its own is not that much smaller than the comedy section. So there is a big. It's still vastly more than you could ever see. So I never complained about the amount of theatre that there is there. Although some people say, "Oh, comedy's got too dominant." I kind of think, well, have you not got enough theatre? Is that a problem for you? So why comedy has got? But comedy has become an industry in a way that it was a bit more ramshackle previously. I guess it would be more Oxford and Cambridge footlights, wouldn't it? That would be the route to comedy success in the, or even before that, variety theatre or whatever. That would be the way you would become a successful comedian. Morecambe and Wise would come out of the end of the pier sort of route. But now there is a route which people like you can walk down and run down,
like
speed
me?
down.
All right.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing your show on Dave in 2016.
You'll be well. That's optimistic. It's great. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. That was Mark. I learnt so much from him. I can't even tell you what an honour it was to sit down with someone with that number of years behind him in the fringe and in reviewing and in editing and just everything, and learn exactly what it took to get his book out, exactly what it took to get his book out, exactly what it took or exactly what he gets out of the Fringe. And like you said, it's like his Christmas. So it's so lovely to meet people. I mean, I feel like I haven't really met anyone yet who just doesn't love what they do in this, and that's something that I'm really learning. Like, from an outsider point of view, and I'm sorry any reviewers that are listening, from an outsider point of view, as a performer who has been going about 4.5, nearly 5 years, you sort of think sometimes, like, reviewers, you get those kind of cliches of reviewers are failed comedians, reviewers are people that couldn't make it as comedians, or all that crap. And the more you talk to them, and the more you spend time with them, and the more you just ask them genuine questions out of actual interest, you realise that they're just people that love comedy, and they just want to do the best job they can to help everyone out. And he's obviously a theatre reviewer, so it's slightly different. It meant we got to have a bit more of a candid conversation about stuff, because it's not a vested interest for him as it's such. But theatre suffers from a lot of the same problems that comedy suffers with, in the fact that it's so saturated up there in Edinburgh and the Fringe. And it's just amazing to have had such a lovely conversation with such a well-rounded and educated person on the subject. So thank you so much for coming on, Mark. That was amazing. Quick things to remind you of: if you're going to buy the Edinburgh Fringe Survival Guide, please do it through the book link on the website or in the show notes of the podcast. It really helps out the show. I get about 10p a book, and like I said before, it doesn't cost you any more. It's an Amazon affiliate link. It just means they give me a cut of the sale that they were going to get profit from. So please do that. My show, again, it's been moved. Please, if you're going to come and see me in Edinburgh, it is at Just the Tonic Caves. It's in the Spare Room at the Caves. That's the name of the room I'm in. It's at 7:30pm every night except the 18th and the 24th. There's 60 seats, but it's free Fringe, so please come. You can pay what you want on exit. It's like a bucket donation thing. Speaking of donations, feel free to give me a PayPal donation on the website. Whatever you think this podcast is worth. If you listen to 10 episodes and you think they're all worth £1, give me £10. If you've listened to all of the episodes, please send me £22 if you think they're worth £1, or if you think they're worth more than that, please send me more than that. If you don't want to do it that way, the crowdfundy way that I'm doing it at the moment is Patreon, where you can give as low as $1 per episode. Please do it if you can. Don't donate if you can't. Honestly, they're free. They will always be free. But if you can give $1 an episode, which is 90p or something, and I get 80p at the end after the site's taken their cut, it really makes a difference, and it gives me this budget for the show, which really, really takes away the sting of taking off a day to go and talk to someone and to edit the podcast and all this stuff. They take about 12 hours to do, so like it's not a short task, and to put the show notes up and make the imagery for the site and everything, it's a lot of effort. So if you've appreciated the effort, please do take a minute to have a look at the Patreon page. Please go and have a look at the Patreon page. You can find the link on the website. And also join the Facebook group. Sorry, that was something else I didn't mention before. Join the Facebook group. We're always sharing stuff in there. I'm announcing new guests in there. It's the best place to get the most real-time information about stuff that I'm talking about to do with the podcast. And also I'm hoping to encourage more industry discussion in there about new guests and about things that are happening as they're happening. So that's called Ask the Industry Podcast, of course, and it's on Facebook. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for sharing the links and for continuing to spread the word about this podcast. It really helps. It can't survive without your support. So please do keep the community going and growing. That's so lovely of you. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you so much for your support. And next time I'll see you where we will have comedian Beck Hill coming on, talking about the Edinburgh Fringe, talking about her experiences at creating a Fringe audience, and what the Fringe means to her in terms of a business side, so what she gets out of doing a show every year, and how she makes money on an alternative circuit, as in not just the big clubs. She makes her living through independent clubs and putting together shows on her own, and also doing a lot of open mics so she can prepare for her shows. It's a really fascinating podcast, and I can't wait to bring it out. It'll be out in about 7, 8, 9 days. So thank you so much for listening again. Bye.